Have you ever wondered what it's like to live under the same roof with someone who doesn't respect you at all? Today, I'm going to tell you the story of my daughter-in-law, Clara, and how her cruelty almost destroyed our family, but also how life taught her a lesson she'll never forget. Before we dive in, make sure to comment below your thoughts and subscribe to our channel for more real-life family stories. My name is Evelyn Miller, and I want to tell you my story not just as a mother-in-law, but as a woman who has lived long enough to see the depths of human nature, the pain of misunderstanding, and the healing power of love and patience. Clara, my daughter-in-law, came into our home full of pride, selfishness, and arrogance, and for a long time, I didn't know if she would ever change. When Clara first arrived, I tried to be warm, welcoming, and patient. I had raised her husband, Ryan, from a little boy, and I wanted her to feel like part of the family. I had imagined that we could build a harmonious household together, where love and respect were mutual. But from the beginning, Clara made it clear that she had no intention of respecting anyone, least of all me. At first, it was small things. She would criticize the way I cooked, the way I cleaned, or the way I managed the household. She would point out mistakes in my speech, scoff at my habits, and openly mock me in subtle ways that made it clear she thought herself superior. But as days passed, the small comments grew into something far more destructive. Clara began undermining me with Ryan, planting doubts in his mind, and twisting situations so I appeared incompetent. I endured it quietly because I loved my son and my family. I didn't want to create conflict or tension in our home, but every night I would lie awake, wondering why someone could be so cruel, so blinded by pride that they would belittle the person who had cared for their husband since he was a boy. Sometimes I would cry silently, praying for patience, strength, and wisdom to handle the situation without retaliation, yet my patience was tested again and again. Clara had an uncanny way of turning minor issues into reasons for criticism, often exaggerating or completely fabricating stories to make herself appear right. She blamed me for things I never did, misrepresented my intentions, and constantly accused me of meddling or controlling. Ryan was caught in the middle, confused and often trying to calm the storm between us. I watched her closely, trying to understand why she was this way. Sometimes I wondered if it was jealousy, insecurity, or simply a lack of understanding of family values. Regardless, I knew one thing: patience and love would be the only way to handle her. I couldn't respond with anger. I couldn't meet cruelty with cruelty. I spent months trying to bridge the gap. I would offer advice, guidance, and kindness, hoping that she would see my heart and understand that I only wanted what was best for our family. But she remained critical, harsh, and unyielding. It hurt deeply, but I endured it, because love requires endurance, especially when the ones you care about do not yet recognize the value of your sacrifice. Little did I know that life had its own way of teaching lessons. The universe doesn't always confront us directly. Sometimes it chooses indirect methods, and in Clara's case, the first lesson came through something she could neither control nor ignore: her own dreams. Clara began to experience vivid visions that showed her my life before she ever entered it. She saw me as a young mother, struggling to raise Ryan with little help, working nights and days to make ends meet, sewing his clothes by hand, preparing meals late into the night, and enduring exhaustion, worry, and loneliness. She saw the sacrifices she had mocked, the hardships she had ignored, and the love that had sustained our family for decades. These dreams unsettled her, though she didn't immediately understand why. She began to act differently, pausing in rooms, watching me, noticing things she had never cared to notice before. She observed my hands, my careful movements, the small gestures I made to keep our home functioning, and the love I poured into every corner of our family. At first, it was subtle. She would hesitate before criticizing, occasionally help with small chores, or ask questions she hadn't before. I noticed these changes but remained calm. True understanding cannot be forced. It must come from within. And for Clara, the journey had just begun. Patience, endurance, and love, I realized, were my strongest tools. And I knew, deep down, that eventually The lessons she needed to learn would reveal themselves in time. The first time I realized that Clara's heart might actually be opening was when she started having strange dreams. She never told me about them at first, but I could see it in the way she acted differently, hesitant, distracted, almost haunted by something she couldn't name. Later, she admitted that the dreams had been vivid, almost unbearable. She had seen my younger self struggling to raise Ryan as a newborn, exhausted and yet determined to provide, to protect, and to love. She had seen the nights I went without food to ensure he was fed, the long hours I spent sewing his little clothes, and the endless worry that never left me. Through her dreams, Clara witnessed everything she had belittled or mocked. She saw the labor I had endured silently, the sacrifices she had ignored, and the endless patience I had shown even when life was difficult. I knew these visions were working on her in a way words never could. For once, she was seeing reality through my eyes. It wasn't immediate, though. For several days afterward, she wandered through the house in silence, seemingly wrestling with her conscience. I noticed the subtle changes: how she hesitated before snapping at me, how she paused to watch me move around the house, even just observing quietly from a distance. She began asking small, tentative questions about the house, about Ryan, and about me. It was a stark contrast to her earlier behavior when she would openly challenge and belittle me. One evening, I found her in the kitchen, standing by the counter as I prepared dinner. Her hands were clasped nervously, her eyes hesitant. She finally asked, "Mom, how did you manage everything when Ryan was little? All alone, working so hard?" I paused, touched by the sincerity in her voice. I explained how difficult it had been: the financial struggles, the nights spent worrying, the constant juggling of work, household, and raising a child. I told her about moments she would never have known, about the nights I went without sleep, about the illnesses I endured quietly, and about the sacrifices I had made to ensure Ryan never felt the hardship I was experiencing. Clara listened in silence, her expression changing with every word. I could see the realization dawning on her. Everything she had blamed me for, everything she had mocked, had been done in love. She began to understand how little she truly knew, and how unfair her judgments had been. After that evening, I noticed subtle acts of change. Clara began helping with chores, though hesitantly. She asked for advice on things she had previously criticized. Her tone softened, her sharp words replaced by questions, and her body language became less defensive. She seemed smaller in her pride, and yet more genuine. One day, she approached me with a willingness I had never seen before. "Mom," she said softly, "I want to learn. Can you show me how to care for the house properly? I want to do it right." I smiled quietly, my heart warming. "Of course, Clara. It's never too late to learn. And caring for a home, like caring for a family, is about patience, attention, and respect." From that moment on, our interactions changed. Clara was no longer the arrogant, dismissive woman who had walked into our home months ago. She was tentative, uncertain, but willing. That willingness was the first true sign of transformation. Even so, I knew her growth was just beginning. True understanding wasn't in observing or asking, it was in living it. And for Clara, the next step would come sooner than I expected, in a moment that would challenge her in ways that no lesson, no dream, could prepare her for. The universe had begun teaching her lessons, but the real test of her heart and character was yet to come. The real test of Clara's transformation came sooner than I expected, and it arrived in a way that neither of us could have anticipated. Ryan fell ill one evening, a high fever, persistent chills, and a panic that gripped him suddenly. Clara, who had been slowly opening her heart, was thrown into a state of complete panic. She rushed around, wringing her hands, trying to do something, anything, but unable to find control. I stayed calm. I had faced emergencies before, both with Ryan as a child and in other areas of my life, and I knew that panic would only worsen the situation. I guided Clara gently, instructing her on what to do: prepare a warm compress, call the doctor, gather medications, and stay calm. I could feel Clara's eyes on me, wide with fear and realization. She was seeing, For the first time in months, the patience and determination that I had quietly shown for decades, she stumbled through some of the steps, but I didn't scold her. Instead, I corrected her with gentle guidance, showing her how to move efficiently and calmly. I could see her mind working, piecing together what she had seen in my dreams with what she was witnessing in reality. For the first time, she understood that love and care were not just words, they were deliberate actions. Sometimes exhausting, sometimes thankless, but always necessary. As the evening wore on, I continued to manage the situation, keeping Ryan comfortable and ensuring the doctor arrived on time. Clara began to follow my instructions without hesitation, her panic slowly transforming into focused attention. I noticed a change in her posture, the way her hands shook less, the way she observed instead of reacting impulsively. This was the moment when the weight of her previous behavior started to hit her fully, the cruel words, the judgments, the lack of respect. After Ryan stabilized and the doctor left, Clara sat beside him, quietly holding his hand. She didn't speak at first. I watched her in silence, seeing a new depth in her eyes, a new humility. When she finally looked at me, her voice trembled. "Mom, I didn't realize. I never understood. You've done all this, all these years, and I never saw it. I'm so sorry." Her apology was halting, incomplete, but sincere. I reached out and placed my hand on hers. "Clara, the journey isn't over. Understanding comes in steps. You've seen, and that is the first step. Now, you must act on it." Over the next few days, I watched Clara closely. She continued to help with Ryan's care, preparing his meals carefully, checking his temperature, and making sure he rested. But more importantly, she started paying attention to the small details: the way I managed medications, the care I took in preparing meals, the attentiveness required to maintain the home. She began asking questions about my routines, my choices, and even about my past struggles. It became clear to me that Clara was beginning to absorb lessons not just intellectually, but emotionally. She was learning what it meant to truly care for someone, to recognize the sacrifices of another, and to understand patience and endurance. One afternoon, as we sat together tidying the living room, Clara looked at me with a mixture of guilt and curiosity. "Mom, I want to do better. I want to learn everything you've done, everything you've sacrificed, so I can honor it, so I can be a better wife, a better daughter-in-law." Her words, though simple, carried weight. For months, I had endured her criticism silently, always hoping for a moment like this, a moment where she would see, hear, and finally understand. And now it was happening. I smiled softly, trying not to reveal the depth of my relief. "Clara, that is all I could hope for. True understanding doesn't come overnight. It comes with time, patience, and consistent action. You are ready to take the next step." The illness had inadvertently become the catalyst for her growth. She had faced a real-life situation where she could no longer judge, ignore, or criticize. She had been forced to act, to care, and to witness sacrifice firsthand. And in doing so, she had begun the slow but genuine process of change. As I watched her work quietly beside me that evening, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't felt in months. For the first time, it seemed possible that Clara could truly transform, not through lectures, not through confrontation, but through observation, empathy, and lived experience. The house, once heavy with tension, had begun to breathe again. And though I knew the journey wasn't over, I could feel the faint but undeniable shift Clara was learning. And she was changing. After Ryan's illness, Clara's behavior began to shift more noticeably. She no longer spoke with the harshness and impatience that had marked her arrival into our home. Instead, she moved with hesitation, often glancing at me for guidance, as if she were finally learning to see the world through my eyes. The change was gradual, but it was there, unmistakable. I observed it quietly, letting her take the first steps without interference. True change cannot be forced, it must be allowed to grow organically. One morning, Clara approached me in the kitchen, where I was preparing breakfast. Her hands were fidgeting nervously, and she spoke with a sincerity I had rarely heard from her. "Mom, I want to help. I want to learn how you do things, how you manage everything so calmly. I want to understand, really understand." Her words touched me deeply. For so long, she had dismissed me, mocked me, and blamed me for imagined faults. And now, here she was, asking not for control or authority, but for guidance. I nodded gently, gesturing for her to join me. "Clara, caring for a home, like caring for a family, requires patience, observation, and love in every action. It's not about perfection. It's about consistency and care." We spent the morning together. I showed her how to prepare certain meals, how to manage schedules, how to anticipate the needs of a household. She listened intently, asking questions, taking notes mentally, and sometimes hesitating before trying to replicate a task. When she made mistakes, I corrected her softly, never scolding, never belittling. Every small action was a teaching moment. It was during these mornings that I began to notice something deeper in Clara. She was no longer simply mimicking my actions, she was absorbing the philosophy behind them. She began to understand that the patience, discipline, and care I practiced daily were not about routine alone. They were expressions of love, responsibility, and respect for the people around me. This realization, I could see, was slowly reshaping her attitude. One afternoon, Clara asked to hear more about my life before she had entered it. She wanted to know how I had managed raising Ryan alone, what struggles I had endured, and what had motivated me to persist through difficult times. I shared stories of sleepless nights, financial worries, and personal sacrifices. I spoke honestly about the exhaustion, the anxiety, and the love that never wavered. As I spoke, Clara listened in silence, occasionally wiping away a tear, her expression one of shock and empathy. She began to see that the life I had lived was not simple, that every action she had criticized or ignored had been the result of years of effort and resilience. I could feel her perspective shifting, her heart softening, and her judgment giving way to understanding. Over the next several days, Clara's actions began to reflect her growing awareness. She helped prepare meals with care, checked in on Ryan thoughtfully, and even began assisting me with household chores without complaint. She sought my guidance and accepted it with humility, something she had rarely done before. It was clear that Clara's learning had moved beyond simple observation. She was internalizing the values I had tried to instill through my actions: patience, empathy, and the quiet, persistent labor of love. Each day, she grew more attentive, more considerate, and more aware of the sacrifices that had built the family she had now become a part of. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, she spoke softly, her voice tinged with remorse. "Mom, I know I've been unfair. I know I've hurt you, and I'm so sorry. I didn't see anything before, but I want to change. I want to honor all that you've done." I reached out and held her hand gently. "Clara, recognizing the mistakes you've made is only the first step. Now you must live differently, consistently, and with sincerity. Change is gradual, but it is possible, and I can see you are on that path." From that moment, I felt a glimmer of hope that our home could finally become a place of harmony. The tension that had clouded the air for so long was slowly lifting. Clara was learning, and she was beginning to understand that respect, patience, and empathy are not just words, they are actions, and they define the strength of a family. Clara's transformation continued in ways I had never dared to hope for. She was no longer the young, arrogant woman who had walked into our home, quick to judge and slow to understand. Instead, she had become curious, attentive, and surprisingly humble. Each day, I watched her observe small details: the way I managed meals, arranged the house, and cared for Ryan, and then attempt to replicate them with care. Her efforts were clumsy at times but sincere, and that sincerity mattered more than perfection. One afternoon, Clara came to me holding a notebook. She had been keeping a journal of her observations, writing down the little lessons she was learning from me. I was taken aback. She had never been one to reflect, let alone make a conscious effort to understand another person's perspective. But here she was, recording the daily sacrifices, routines, and challenges she had once dismissed as unimportant. I thought, maybe if I write things down, I can remember them better. she said quietly. "I want to understand everything you've done for this family, Mom. I don't want to take it for granted anymore." I smiled gently, placing a hand on hers. "Clara, that is a good start. Understanding begins with observation, reflection, and intention. But it is action that proves sincerity. Seeing is not enough. Doing is what matters." Over the next week, I began letting her take on more responsibilities in the household. I guided her through tasks, explained why certain things were important, and answered her endless questions patiently. She asked about meal planning, household budgeting, caring for Ryan, and even the smallest details about how I had managed our family for years. Every question reflected a growing awareness and a willingness to learn. It was during one of these sessions that Clara surprised me most. She asked about my past struggles, about my childhood, my early marriage, and the hardships I had endured raising Ryan largely on my own. I told her about long nights of worry, the financial challenges that seemed impossible at times, and the personal sacrifices I had made silently. As I spoke, Clara's eyes filled with tears. For the first time, she truly saw the depth of what I had done for her husband and for the family. Her remorse was genuine. She began to admit mistakes she had made, not just to me, but also to Ryan. She apologized for the harsh words, the criticism, and the arrogance she had displayed. Watching her take accountability was more moving than anything I had expected. I realized that Clara was not only learning about me, she was learning about herself, about the impact of her actions, and about the responsibilities that come with being part of a family. I began to notice the way she interacted with Ryan had changed too. Where she had once been impatient and critical, she now showed care and attentiveness. She checked on him, prepared meals thoughtfully, and even helped him with tasks he found tedious. The warmth between them was slowly returning, and I could see that our home, once tense and strained, was beginning to feel lighter. One evening, Clara approached me with something unexpected, a small box she had been keeping hidden. Inside were photographs, handwritten notes, and little mementos of our family life. Each page reflected memories she had never seen before, small gestures I had made, and moments I had quietly endured. She presented it to me with trembling hands. "I wanted you to know I see everything now," she whispered. "All the sacrifices, all the love, all the patience you've shown. I want you to know I understand. And I'm sorry for everything I've done." I took the scrapbook gently, my hands shaking slightly with emotion. I traced the pages with my fingers, tears welling in my eyes. Clara had finally seen me, truly seen me, and she had gone out of her way to honor my life and my sacrifices. That moment changed everything. I realized that patience, quiet endurance, and love could eventually reach even the most stubborn heart. Clara's journey was far from over, but I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. She had begun to understand that family is not about control, criticism, or superiority. It is about empathy, care, and mutual respect. From that day on, our home began to feel more harmonious. Clara continued learning, helping, and growing, and I could finally see the beginnings of the woman I had hoped she could become. Clara's transformation continued steadily after she presented the scrapbook. It was more than just an apology, it was a tangible sign that she had started to see life through my eyes. From that day forward, she approached our household with a new level of humility and curiosity, as though she were willing to learn everything she had previously ignored. I could see it in the little things, how she now checked if Ryan needed help before he asked, how she prepared meals with care, and how she asked me for guidance instead of dismissing my advice outright. One morning, I noticed her lingering in the kitchen after breakfast. She was organizing the pantry, but her movements were careful, deliberate. "Mom," she said softly, "can you show me again how you plan the week? I want to learn properly this time. I want to do things right." I smiled, a warmth spreading through me that I hadn't felt in months. "Clara, learning isn't just about efficiency, it's about understanding why things are done. Family life, like cooking or cleaning, is more than the task. It's the thought, the care, and the attention behind it." She nodded eagerly and followed me closely as I explained the routines I had developed over decades, how I managed meals to meet everyone's preferences. scheduled household chores to balance responsibilities, and planned for both the predictable and the unexpected. She asked questions, took notes in her mind, and tried to apply what she learned immediately. Over time, her understanding deepened. She began noticing the little details I had hoped she would see: how I prepared Ryan's favorite dishes just the way he liked them, the small adjustments I made for comfort, the quiet ways I maintained harmony in the house. Her appreciation grew as she realized the endless labor and love behind each simple act. But it wasn't just about chores. Clara began to ask about my past, about the challenges I faced raising Ryan, the sacrifices I made, and the moments when I struggled silently. I told her about the nights I went without sleep, working long hours to care for him, the financial difficulties that seemed insurmountable, and the emotional toll of managing a household largely on my own. I spoke honestly about my fears, my exhaustion, and my determination to endure. She listened in stunned silence, her eyes wide and glistening with tears. "Mom, I had no idea," she whispered. "All this time, I thought you were just strict, or controlling, or overbearing. I never understood how much you did, how much you endured." I reached out and placed a gentle hand on hers. "Clara, the point isn't that you were wrong, or that you judged too harshly. The point is that you can choose to see, understand, and grow. You can choose to learn from the past rather than repeat the mistakes. And it seems you are finally ready to make that choice." From that moment, Clara's humility became consistent. She actively sought ways to contribute to the household, helping with meals, cleaning, and organizing, often without needing instruction. More importantly, she began showing kindness in her interactions with Ryan, treating him with attentiveness and care that reflected her growing understanding of the responsibilities of love and family. One day, as we were organizing some old family photos, she turned to me with a soft, almost vulnerable expression. "Mom, I want to know everything. I want to understand the sacrifices you've made, the struggles you faced. I want to make sure I honor them, and honor you, in every way I can." Her words touched me deeply. After months of cruelty and judgment, she had finally come to a place of respect and sincerity. The woman who had entered my home with pride and arrogance had begun to transform into someone capable of empathy, patience, and genuine care. I realized then that patience and love, even when tested to their limits, could indeed reach a heart that was willing to open. Clara's journey had not been easy, but the first seeds of understanding and change had taken root. She was learning, not just through observation, but through reflection, humility, and lived experience, and though I knew there were still lessons ahead, I felt a sense of relief and hope. The walls of tension that had long separated us were beginning to crumble, replaced with the possibility of mutual respect, love, and harmony. By this time, Clara's transformation had become visible to everyone in the household. The young woman who had once criticized me at every opportunity was now thoughtful, careful, and attentive. She no longer reacted with impatience or sharp words. Instead, she paused, observed, and tried to understand. I could see her making an effort not just to learn, but to internalize the lessons I had tried to teach for months. One afternoon, Clara approached me in the living room, carrying a small stack of dishes she had washed. "Mom, I noticed that the plates and bowls weren't stacked properly," she said, almost shyly. "I tried to do it the way you showed me. Can you check if it's correct?" I smiled. My heart warmed. "Clara, it's perfect, but the important thing is that you care enough to learn and to try." It was a simple moment, but it marked something profound. She had begun valuing not just the outcome, but the thought and effort behind it. She no longer saw housework, childcare, or family responsibilities as burdens. She understood them as acts of love and service. Over the next few days, I noticed Clara taking initiative in ways she hadn't before. She prepared meals for Ryan without being asked, ensured the house was tidy, and even began noticing small things that required attention, like the broken handle on the kitchen cabinet or the leaking faucet in the bathroom. She was learning not just the tasks, but the responsibility of anticipating needs, of caring for her family proactively. But what touched me most was how she began treating me. She spoke with respect and patience, asking for advice rather than dismissing it. She listened carefully when I shared stories of my past, genuinely interested in the sacrifices I had made for the family. She no longer saw me as an obstacle or someone to criticize. She began to understand me as a human being who had lived a life of love, endurance, and responsibility. One evening, as I sat sewing a button onto one of Ryan's shirts, Clara came and sat beside me. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything you've done. I realize now how unfair I've been, how harsh my words were, and how blind I was to your sacrifices. I'm sorry." Her apology was heartfelt. I could see the genuine remorse in her eyes, the shame of realizing how much pain she had caused, but also the hope that she could make amends. I took her hand and said, "Clara, acknowledging your mistakes is only the first step. The real change comes from your actions from this moment forward. And I can see that you are ready." Clara's humility became consistent from that point on. She began assisting Ryan with his daily routines, checking on him when I wasn't around, and even taking initiative to improve the household. She asked me questions about the past, the lessons I had learned, and how I had faced hardships without complaint. Each answer she received deepened her understanding and strengthened her respect. For the first time, I felt that Clara had begun to see me fully, not as a strict, overbearing mother-in-law, but as a human being who had loved and sacrificed silently for decades. And in that recognition, I sensed a healing beginning, a bridge forming between us that had once seemed impossible to build. It was clear that her transformation was not just about learning to manage a home or to care for Ryan. It was about learning empathy, patience, and the value of seeing the sacrifices of others. She was beginning to understand that love requires humility and endurance, and that family bonds are strengthened by respect, understanding, and genuine care. The final step in Clara's transformation came quietly, without fanfare, but with profound significance. One afternoon, she approached me with a small box she had been keeping hidden. Inside were handwritten notes, small photos, and mementos she had collected over the past few months, moments she had observed, little acts of care, and memories she now realized held deep meaning. "I wanted you to know," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "I see everything now. I see your sacrifices, your patience, your love. I am so sorry for how I treated you, and I want to honor everything you've done." I held the box gently, overwhelmed by the depth of her sincerity. For months, I had endured criticism, mockery, and judgment, yet here she was, choosing recognition over pride, empathy over arrogance. She had truly learned. From that day, our household was filled with a new warmth. Clara's actions were consistent. She prepared meals thoughtfully, cared for Ryan attentively, and treated me with genuine respect. She no longer sought to control or dominate, but to support and understand. The tension that had long shadowed our home had lifted, replaced by harmony, patience, and mutual appreciation. I watched Ryan interact with her, relieved and happy to see the change. He noticed the respect, the care, and the gentle love Clara now offered. It was as though a new chapter had begun for all of us, a chapter built on understanding, forgiveness, and growth. Clara's journey was a testament to the power of patience, love, and quiet endurance. She had learned that cruelty and judgment harm the heart, while empathy, humility, and reflection can transform it. She realized that family is not about dominance or criticism, but about understanding, sacrifice, and care. For my part, I had learned as well. I saw the resilience of love and patience, and the way they could guide even the most stubborn heart to understanding. I understood that justice is not about punishment, but about growth, reflection, and the courage to change. In the end, Clara became more than just my daughter-in-law. She became a true member of our family in the fullest sense. And as I watched her move through the house, caring for Ryan, for me, and for the home, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had learned the value of empathy, the importance of respect, and the quiet power of love, and I realized that sometimes The hardest lessons bring the greatest transformation, lessons that begin with observation, continue with reflection, and are completed through action. Clara had endured the journey, and in the process, our family had been restored. It was a long path, filled with mistakes and pain, but it ended in understanding, forgiveness, and genuine love. And in that, we all found peace.